Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Prozer of Kehillat Bet HaMidrash, Kempsville Conservative Synagogue in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is the Torah portion for Saturday, Shabbat, August 8th, 2020, corresponding to the 18th day of the Hebrew month of 5780. We thank Rabbi Joseph Prauser, Rabbi Michael Gold, Rabbi Avram Kogan, Rabbi Mordechai Silverstein, and the United Synagogue Torah Sparks series for their various teachings and publications on this week's Parsha. This Shabbat, August 8th, we read the Parsha of Eikev, the third Parsha in the book of Devarim, which begins on page 1037 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 780 of the Hertz. This Parsha opens with Moshe nearing the end of his stewardship of the people, continuing to address the Israelites. He gives an elaborate description of the blessings and rewards that will be forthcoming when Israel is faithful to its covenant with God. If the Israelites obey the covenants, God will bless them and multiply them, and their crops and cattle will flourish. Israel's enemies, in contrast, will suffer at God's hand. Israel will destroy hostile nations it encounters, despite its foes' superior numbers. In doing so, Israel is further instructed that it must destroy all idolatrous images and abhorrent things. They must not be taken as booty or used in any way, lest they lead to idolatrous behavior among the Israelites themselves. The hardships of the wilderness period, the crucible in which the Israelite nation was forged and tested, are contrasted with the beauty and bounty of the promised land that awaits them. The final verse of this description of the land, "When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you," is the basis for the practice of Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. This obligatory expression of gratitude is expanded to a more general principle. Israel is warned not to forget God's beneficence in times of plenty. We are to remember that our well-being and our prosperity, in fact, all our achievements, are results of God's blessings. Forgetting God will lead to punishment and destruction. Similarly, the Israelite conquest of Canaan, fulfilling God's assurances to the patriarchs, will be effected only through divine agency and providence, not on the basis of any virtue or power on the Israelites themselves. To emphasize this distinction, Moshe recalls Israel's long history of faithlessness and provocations throughout the wilderness period, beginning with their building the golden calf while he was on Mount Sinai receiving the commandments. After much supplication, God allowed Moshe to fashion a new set of tablets of the law to replace those that he broke during the golden calf incident, and allowed the march to the promised land to continue. Israel's leader leaves no doubt as to his or God's expectations of the covenant people. What does the Lord your God demand of you? Only this: to revere the Lord your God, to walk only in his paths, to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, keeping the Lord's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you this day for good. The first example provided of walking in God's paths is Israel's duty to treat strangers lovingly. Moshe further contrasts the dire consequences of disloyalty to God and the rewards awaiting God's faithful. He similarly contrasts the life the Israelites knew in Egypt with the particular blessings, natural and spiritual, awaiting them in the land of Israel, a land that the Lord your God looks after, a land on which the Lord your God always keeps his eye from year's beginning to year's end. These two themes are intimately linked. Conquest and possession of the land will be achieved only through fidelity to God's laws. The nexus between law and land is given final closing emphasis in a passage that is included in our daily liturgy as the second paragraph of the Shema. Israel is instructed in the rewards for obeying God's commandments and the punishment for forsaking them in agricultural terms, describing the abundance of rain versus the withholding of rain, themes that will be very important to them when they farm the promised land. In a reprise of the earlier passage that we read last week in Parshat Eikev, known to us as the first paragraph of the Shema, the V'ahavta, they are again reminded to impress these words upon your very heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up, and inscribe them upon the doorposts of your houses and your gates, adding, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to you and your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is heaven over the earth. If the Israelites follow God's commandments, the people of the land will dread them, and they will conquer the territory God has promised to them. The Haftorah for this Shabbat is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 49, verse 14, through chapter 51, verse 3, beginning on page 1056 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 794 of the Hertz. Just as in the past few weeks, this Haftorah is not connected to this week's Parsha of Eikev by theme. Rather, it was chosen as the second of 7 Haftorot of consolation that follow Tisha B'Av. The Haftorah enunciates the despair of Zion, which feels forgotten and abandoned by God in the years since the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE and the exile of the Judeans to Babylonia. It is a series of prophecies offering messages of strength to those who needed encouragement to return from the Babylonian exile to the Judean homeland of Eretz Yisrael. It was also a message of encouragement to those in the Judean homeland challenged with absorbing the refugees. This message is encapsulated in one particular prophecy at the end of the Haftorah. Look to the rock you were hewn from, and to the quarry from which you were cut. Look to Avraham your father, and to Sarah who spawned you. For he was the one whom I summoned, and I blessed him and made him many. This prophecy draws an analogy between the founders of their faith, Avraham and Sarah, and those who would return from the Babylonian exile. Just as Avraham and Sarah left Ur Kasdim in what would become Babylonia to go to the land of Canaan, so too the Babylonian exiles would leave their temporary homes and return to the land of Judea, and there become a multitudinous nation. The intent of this message was not exclusively to encourage the refugees. It also presented a subtle message to those who were not pleased that the Jews of Babylonia were returning. The prophet wanted the refugees to know that their role was no less significant before God than that of those who remained throughout the exile. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to click like and subscribe below. Thank you.